Good morning. May I please ask you to start gaining your seats? Thank you. Good morning. Nice to see you again. I hope you got a chance to get well rested after a very long day of discussions yesterday. I personally thought that the three panels that we've seen yesterday were kind of indicating a lot of the research gaps between the research that is produced outside of the region and the research is produced inside the region. Before we start, I'm gonna leverage my authority as the master of ceremony to do a shameless announcement of another conference we're organizing in June 2026. It's the Econometric Society Africa meeting, and it's in June 2026 from the 10th to the 13th, 2026. So we have a lineup of very distinguished speakers, mainly Guido from Stanford, the Nobel Prize winners, our own graduate Karim Abadir, and Wolfram and Sina from Princeton. So please mark your calendars. It's from the 10th to the 13th June. And it's 2026, I apologize for the typo. The call of paper will be out in September, so please look out for it. We'll be sending it out to all of you. You're more than welcome to come and join us. So with that, let me introduce the next panel. So the next panel is a very timely topic. Again, it's the green transition, AI, and the future of jobs, something that really is a common denominator of timely topics across the globe. I want to invite Antonio Spilimbergo. He's the Deputy Director at the Research Department of the IMF. He worked in different international organizations, such as the Inter-American Development Bank. He was, since 1997, in the IMF, the European Fiscal Research and Western Hemisphere departments. He has been mission chief to different European countries and Latin American countries, such as Brazil, Russia, Italy, and Turkey. Currently, he's the Deputy Director. He's a research fellow on the CEPR and the William Davidson Institute, and he has published widely on international trade, economic development, and labor economics. So, Antonio, please, the floor is yours. I'll let you introduce your panelists. Thank you.
It's a pleasure. First of all, it's a pleasure to be here at this fantastic campus and fantastic university. The last panel is about labor market issues, which are super important in the region. The region actually, it's for a labor economist, I would say, is a paradise because there are so many interesting issues to study. There is the issue of women participation, high unemployment, high youth unemployment, informality, migration, rapid demographic transition, social security lagging behind. So there are so many interesting issues to study. But today we are focusing on the new issue, not on the old challenges, on the new issue, including the green transition and the impact of the green transition on labor market, and especially on AI and digitalization. So I think it is a note of optimism also, not only talking about the long-term project, but also what long-term problems, but also about what is the challenging for the future. We are lucky to have three distinguished panelists. And we have first Dina Abdel Fattah, who is assistant professor here at the American University, and she's an expert about migration, women participation, and labor market in general, and she will talk about how this is important, especially for Egypt. Second, we have Tito Boeri, who is head of the economic department in Bocconi University. He's he's a renowned labor and economist in general, and he's he will talk also about the impact of AI and green transition on labor markets. And finally, Ugo Panizza, who is teaching at Geneva University and also member of the CPR. So I don't want to hold further. Let's start with Dina, and we'll move in alphabetical order. Thank you very much. It's about 20 minutes.
Hello, good morning, everyone. Thank you, Antonio, for the introduction. And I will actually add one point as I start. So the new transitions are actually dictated by the old narrative as well. So it's very important to understand the old narrative if we really want to understand how the new transitions are going to impact this side of the world. So this is why we consider it a very pivotal moment in global and regional development. The MENA region stands at the crossroad of three profound transformations. These are about how people live, how they work, how they adapt, all unfolding simultaneously. The risks could include job displacement, widened inequality, heightened social vulnerability, particularly among young people, women, informal workers, and rural populations. This is why I'm saying the old narrative is very important as we get to look at this transition. So when we speak of the future of jobs in the MENA region, we are not addressing a single transition. We are confronting three overlapping high-impact transitions that are unfolding in parallel. These transitions, each bringing their own dynamics, but what makes them especially critical in our regions is the interdependency and the asymmetry. In other words, the impact is not evenly distributed, and if left unmanaged, they threaten to reinforce structural inequalities in our labor markets. So if we start with the green transition or the green economy, while the global discourse often focuses on green jobs as an opportunity, and they really are, they also pose substantial displacement risks, especially in fossil fuel reliant and high emission sectors such as construction, cement, and transportation. All are key sectors in Egypt and the GCC countries. According to the ILO, by 2030, the shift to a green economy could result in a net gain of 18 million jobs globally, but a loss of 6 million jobs globally, many in sectors with high male employment and low upskilling capacity. In Egypt, low awareness and integration of green skills into vocational training with minimal orientation to climate-resilient agriculture, sustainable energy, or green construction, particularly outside urban centers. Going to the AI and digital technologies, the MENA region has relatively low exposure to AI technologies, meaning that few jobs are currently being augmented or replaced. But this is not good news. Our education and training systems are not equipping workers to adapt or collaborate with AI. In Egypt, even in high-tech industries, AI readiness is concentrated in a small elite and not the broader workforce. This creates major risk of job polarization, where high-skilled jobs flourish, low-skilled informal jobs persist, and the middle-skilled jobs disappear, a trend we're already seeing in urban services sectors. Demographics is also a point that is very important to be discussed at this point. The MENA region is considered the youngest region in the world, where over 60% of the population is under 30, and nearly 30% of the young people are unemployed, with much higher rates among women. So the labor market is simply not absorbing youth at the pace or quality required. If we get to Egypt, nearly 90% of employed youth are in formal jobs and often without contracts, benefits, or protection. So we have triple the risk and an unequal impact. The convergence of these transitions is not gender neutral or class neutral. The most vulnerable groups, rural youth, women, informal workers, are also the least prepared for the transitions, and they are least visible in most policy responses. If well managed, these transitions can create new opportunities and more equitable economies. But if mismanaged, they will magnify fragility, drive inequality, and increase the risk of social exclusion. Egypt's labor market today is defined by three interlocking characteristics, and I'll move through them very briefly. So Egypt's youth unemployment remains among the highest in the region. So recent data from the ELMPS, the Egyptian Labor Market Panel Survey, and from the ILO show that unemployment rate for youth aged 15 to 24 is over 25% and over 30% for young women. Among university graduates, unemployment rates are even higher. This is not due to lack of education, but lack of adequate labor absorption and limited quality job creation. Female labor force participation in Egypt is extremely low by international and regional standards. According to CAPMAS and the World Bank, less than 15% of women are economically active. In rural Egypt, Upper Egypt, female labor force participation can drop to under 10%, and among young women aged 18 to 29, 63% of them are not with education, employment, or training. Informality remains the dominant employment reality in Egypt, particularly for youth and women, where over 60% of employment is informal, and this rises to over 85% among youth in rural areas, and in sectors like agriculture and construction. Skills mismatch and underemployment is compounded at this point. Many graduates are overeducated for the jobs they take, not because the jobs are good, but because they have no better options. At the same time, technical and vocational jobs in growth sectors like green construction, renewable energy, and digital logistics remain unfilled because of stigma and poor alignment with training systems. If we fail to address them now, these transitions will reproduce or even worsen these existing labor market failures. So if we look at, if you want to understand how climate change intersects with labor market dynamics in Egypt and the wider MENA region, we need to zoom in, not just at the sectoral level, but at the geographic and demographic margins, where vulnerability is layered and compounded. And one such intersection is rural youth employment. Rising temperature and humidity correlate strongly with increased informal and insecure employment. This means greater likelihood of working without a contract, higher risks of seasonal or unstable jobs, greater dependency on sectors like agriculture and construction that are highly climate sensitive but very low paying jobs. So when we talk about labor market resilience to climate change, it's not just about energy subsidies or emission standards. It's also about expanding rural skilling programs, integrating climate-resilient vocations into technical training, and investing in social protection for informal rural workers. The second major force reshaping the future of work is AI and automation. This is often described, especially in global policy circles, as a frontier of productivity and innovation. But in many ways, for MENA, it represents a paradox. We are simultaneously underexposed to AI and high vulnerable to its disruption. AI will not displace all jobs, but will reshape its tasks. According to the IMF, nearly 40% of global employment is exposed to AI, and in advanced economies, the numbers rise to 60%. In contrast, the Middle East and North Africa, AI exposure is lower, about 25% on average. We have, if we again bring the story home, only 12% of employed Egyptians in 2023 held jobs that are requiring computer skills. Digital platform work is still very marginal, only 0.4% of jobs. Unemployed women have stronger digital skills than employed men, but are excluded from work requiring those skills. This low AI exposure signals a delay in adaptation, a lack of integration of technology into mainstream economic sectors, and more worryingly, a skills infrastructure that is not preparing workers for future tasks. So who is most at risk? What this means is that AI will not arrive as a complement to what we already have. It will arrive in many ways as a replacement if we are not trained to adapt. Routine white-collar jobs, such as back-office admin work, basic data entry, and customer service, will be the first to be affected. Many of these jobs are female-dominated jobs, especially in Egypt's urban labor force, and in sectors like education and health, AI is already being piloted to substitute for content delivery, diagnostics, and data handling. But because informal workers, rural populations, and low-income youth are already excluded from digital access and digital skilling, the risk here is that inequality will be automated and not reduced. The narrative is often hopeful. The green transition will create new jobs, build resilience, and open new sectors. And while this is true in principle, the evidence from Egypt and much of the MENA region suggests that without deliberate interventions, green jobs will remain narrow in access, gendered, and highly exclusive. Across the MENA region and globally, green jobs are increasingly concentrated in sectors like renewable energy, climate-resilient agriculture, efficient construction, sustainable transportation and logistics, waste management, and circular economy. Only 7.8% of jobs in Egypt qualify as green. 80% are in the private sector, and 86% of them are held by men. Women in green private sector jobs earn approximately 41.9 Egyptian pounds per hour versus 23.6 Egyptian pounds per hour in non-green roles. Yet, 52% of women in green jobs are underqualified, a clear skills bottleneck. In Egypt, up to 1 million green jobs could be created over the next decade in sectors like solar, desalination, and sustainable farming. Getting to the gendered natures of these green jobs, these jobs required specialized skills and often exclude women, informal workers, and rural youth. Green jobs require investment in foundational training, industry linkage, and barrier reduction for marginalized groups. Only 21% of green sector employees in Egypt are women, and most are in supportive or administrative roles, not technical or leadership positions. And the question is always why? We see green jobs as physically intensive, technically advanced, which reinforces the gender stereotypes in the region. Women are underrepresented in STEM fields from secondary school onwards, and many vocational institutions are not physically or culturally accessible to women, especially in Upper Egypt and rural governorates. Sectors that are simultaneously labor-absorbing, future-oriented, and growth-driving, particularly in green construction, sustainable agriculture, ICT, and digital services, is where inclusive, sustainable job creation actually happen in this new era of green digital transformation. Scaling energy-efficient buildings alone could generate tens of thousands of jobs in Egypt by 2030, particularly in technical roles suited to vocational and mid-skills youth. But these roles require specific green technical competencies which are not yet integrated into standard construction training curricula. Egypt's climate vulnerability also opens up new opportunity in climate-smart agriculture. These are green jobs, but they also build food security, climate resilience, and rural income stability. With targeted investment and policy support, this sector can reintegrate rural youth, particularly young women, into meaningful employment. Egypt's digital economy has grown rapidly in the last 5 years. Egypt's ICT sector is among the fastest growing in the MENA region, contributing over 5% of GDP and employing hundreds of thousands, many of them under 30. The growth of remote and hybrid work models also opens opportunities for youth and women, particularly in regions where commuting or relocation was previously a barrier. As Egypt faces persistent domestic employment constraints, particularly for its growing youth population, one of the most promising yet under-leveraged strategies is skilling for mobility. In other words, preparing workers not only for local labor markets, but also for global labor demand, especially in regions like the European Union and the GCC. This isn't about promoting immigration for its own sake. It's about recognizing that in a globalized labor economy, migration, when governed strategically, can be a development tool, a safety valve, and a catalyst for investment and skills transfer. Egypt has a large pool of underemployed educated youth, who with the right training and certification could fill these gaps. I'm almost done. Yet, the challenge is that most workers, even educated ones, are not migration ready. So looking at, again, data from Egypt, ELMPS data shows that educated, unemployed women have strong digital skills, a resource for international job placement in care, ICT, or education sectors. Green jobs with global applicability, like solar panel installation, recycling systems, sustainable logistics, are not yet mapped to migration pathways. To be migration ready, workers need technical and vocational skills that are aligned with destination country needs, language proficiency, soft skills like workplace etiquette, intercultural awareness and adaptability, and certified qualifications that are recognized across borders. Right now, very few Egyptian training institutions integrate these components systematically. Skilling for mobility is not a detour from national development, it's a complementary strategy. It reduces domestic labor market pressure, brings in remittances, and accelerates the transfer of global knowledge and experience back home. But for this to work, Egypt must treat migration as an investment and not a last resort. Align training system, diplomatic strategy, and labor market intelligence accordingly. So now from diagnostics to action. Green skills forecasting is needed to identify growth areas. Vocational training curricula must be revised to reflect this, and delivery must be modular, stackable, and portable. Reforming migration governance, where we treat labor migration as a development and diplomatic strategy and not just a labor market overflow mechanism. Building a social compact for transition. The AI and green transitions are global phenomena, but their consequences are profoundly local. They require a new social compact in the region, one that centers human capital in transition plans, prioritizes inclusive labor policies, and links education, employment, and mobility systems under a shared vision. These transitions do not undermine exclusion or marginalization or deepening inequality. They also do not automatically create inclusion or prosperity. The outcome will depend on the decisions that we make today. We must center people in transition strategies, particularly youth, women, migrants, and informal workers, and we must design transitions that don't simply extract skills or labor, but invest in human development as a source of resilience. Thank you.
Thank you very much. This was very good start.
So thank you so much for inviting me to this very interesting conference, very enriching. I'm learning a lot also about the Middle East and North African economies. And this is very interesting because given the demographic transition taking place in Europe, really the future is largely here. So I would like to touch upon 5 issues that, in my view, are particularly important for this region. And particularly, I will devote attention to the technology transition, given that Ugo is going to talk more about the green transition. So the first key issue to be addressed is, are these countries more or less exposed to artificial intelligence than other countries, in particularly in the OECD area? The second issue is, can the tasks that are more important in this region be complements to AI, or will they be substituted by AI? This is clearly a key issue to be addressed, and clearly the answer we could possibly provide is fundamental to understand the type of job reallocation that this country are going to experience in the next few years. Thirdly, what is the scope then for education reforms? Are the education systems in the region ill-equipped for these challenges? And fourthly, given that clearly there will be issues and there will be a reallocation and there will be losers unavoidably whenever there is a technology shock of this magnitude, how can we efficiently protect the losers? The people will be involved and will get unemployment experience, painful adjustment. And therefore, how we can do something to improve the design of social safety net in these countries. In particular, taking into account, as Dina was also reminding us, that we are dealing with countries with a large informal sector. So let me start with the first issue, and this is based on work done by the IMF. I think the IMF Research Department has done very good work in trying to identify the pervasiveness and the type of adjustment that AI involves in different type of countries. So this chart reminds us something which is quite important, and the fact that the MENA regions countries are countries that are like to be less exposed, given the type of jobs that they currently characterize their labor market, are going to be less exposed to AI. But at the same time, they also will be less, experience the positive side of AI in terms of productivity gains and improvement in the quality of work. So in a way, the type of jobs that are dominant in the regions are largely routine jobs. And these routine jobs, unlike in previous technology shocks, won't benefit very much from the AI. At the same time, so there is less risk of being substitute, but also less possibility for being complements to the AI. If you compare the job, the type of distribution of task, and in these countries with those in Germany or in other countries in the OECD area, this is basically the type of characterization that you could possibly get. So there is more routinization in the MENA regions. So in order to benefit fully from the AI developments, one would need to have an education system that creates and give a possibility to individuals to carry out occupation and have tasks that are likely to interact more with artificial intelligence. And unfortunately, countries like Egypt are still investing very little in education compared to other countries. And clearly that is going to hamper the possible use of artificial intelligence as a complement to this human capital that is created in the formal education system. Also, there is a low share of STEM graduates, and clearly STEM are considered as being those who will mostly benefit from the spread of artificial intelligence. And also the achievement in math before post-secondary education are not. There is also an issue of quality of education, which is present in this country. So that's a very serious issue. And in particular, the secondary STEM education is particularly of relatively low quality. So a big investment should be made to improve the quality of education. And one possibility is also to use the type of temporary migration. I think Dina was referring to North European countries that are offering better possibilities in that respect. You know, we have to remind always that immigration doesn't mean the fact that people and connection and ideas flow away. So migration of people does not mean the fact that you lose the human capital entirely of a country. So this type of experience having abroad could be something that improves the chances of a country of origin as well. So some views about brain drain, I mean, have been proved by empirical work, very serious empirical work, not to be that serious. So people also originating these flows, countries originating these flows do benefit from clearly given at some levels this type of outflows. So there will be reallocation unavoidably, and the challenge is how to protect losers in a context where the informal economy is particularly large. And what is really interesting about this area is that this is an area where the degree of informal work has been expanding over time. So in many other countries, we have viewed, for various reasons, there has been a decline in the size of informal sector. In the MENA region, instead, the informal sector is increasing over time. Clearly, there are a lot of issues, as you can imagine, in the measurement of the informal sector, but I think there has been an improvement over time in the quality of statistics that we could possibly get about the size of the informal sector. And it's quite remarkable, the fact that in these countries, the informal sector is increasing over time. That's a very serious issue for clearly protecting workers being involved in job reallocation. In the informal sector, you know, these are jobs that are poorly monitored, where labor standards are not being respected, where social security is not present, so there is no social insurance being provided to workers there. And you know, the other side of a coin, if you like, of this very large informal sector in this country is the fact that the social protection system is largely dominated by non-contributory transfers. So these are payments that are largely unconditional and are provided to poor people. There are clearly also ideological religion features behind this design of a social protection system. And that creates a very difficult situation, because on the one hand, given the size of informal sector, a social protection system which is based on contributory transfers would not be able to protect people being displaced in the process, because clearly these people are not covered by definition from social insurance. But on the other hand, the fact that you have a social safety net, which is based almost entirely of unconditional transfers, does not create the right incentive for people to move out of the informal sector. And, you know, the informal sector is something that has to do with clearly the demand, but also the labor supply side. The very difficult challenge, I think, that these countries are facing is one of getting out of this vicious circle and trying gradually to expand the contributory part of the social welfare system. That would be a way to also reconcile redistribution, the fact that unavoidably this type of risk are concentrated at the low end of the wage distribution. And in Egypt and in many other countries, earning and income inequalities are increasing over time, so we need to protect these people, with the fact that, however, in order to benefit from the coverage of this transfer, you need to be contributing to the system, so you need to get out of the informal sector. So that's, I think, the key challenge for these countries. So in designing the safety net to protect workers on this transition that are taking place, it's very important, in my view, to strengthen this link between contribution and transfers. There is experience of this type because the informal sector is not unique to this region. My country, for instance, is a country where historically we had very large informal sector, and in the redesign of our welfare system, in particular of our pension system, we have increased the contributory, the insurance type of design, in order really to make people aware of the fact that there is a high cost in being in the informal sector. So that is something, I think, that will need to be at the center of thoughts about the redesign of the welfare system in the region. So to summarize, the countries in this region seem to be less exposed to AI than advanced economies. However, the workers in this region are also likely to benefit less from artificial intelligence as a technology that enhances the quality and the productivity of their jobs. The displaced workers in all of these changes that are taking place in this region are poorly protected by technology shocks, notably in the informal sector. Given the fact that technological unemployment, we know, is of long duration, there is a need to improve the safety net. But there is this vicious circle whereby, given that the social protection is dominated by non-contributory transfer, this does not encourage formal employment, and this reduces the tax base for social protection. So it's necessary to really reverse this type of vicious circle and try to move in improving the contributory component of social protection. And another very important and key direction of change is investing more in education. And investment in education may also involve, at least temporarily, because we know that investment in education take a long time, also using temporary out-migration of young people from a region where clearly that does not leave the type of demographic decline that is experienced in Northern Europe, in Europe in general, can be also beneficial to human capital development here. Thank you.
Thank you. In his former life, he was president of the Italian Social Security. So these topics are very close to his heart. The last speaker is please.
Okay, thank you very much. Can you put my slide, please? So, okay. So this is not my first time in Egypt. In fact, this morning I was looking at my files and I found a picture with Gian Maria 25 years ago in front of the pyramid. He's still the same. I used to have hair, but And then I was also looking that I'd written a paper with Barry about Egypt, which the worst timing in the world. So the paper was about the Egyptian bond market, and we finished it in December 2010. And then in January 2011, many things changed in Egypt, and so the paper kind of lost relevance. But anyway, so today we're going to talk about green transition and artificial intelligence in MENA. And I will pick up on some of the topics discussed by both Dina and Tito. And specifically, I will show that some of the patterns that Dina showed hold for Egypt that are generalized to many other countries in the region. But before saying anything, it says, it's always hard to say things about the future, and now it's even harder. So this is the index of global economic policy uncertainty. So the world has always been uncertain, but it's very uncertain now. Anyway, so I'll do three things. So first, I will discuss some simulation which show what could happen to the labor market in certain countries in the region related to the green transitions under different scenarios. Then I will highlight some peculiarities, something that stand out when one looks at the labor market of the region compared to other countries, and then try to finish on a positive note to highlight some opportunities that come out from these numbers. So so let me skip this stuff. This is just. So the simulation that I'm going to show are based on three scenarios. So this is a paper that was done by the ILO joined with the Islamic Development Bank, in which they had three scenarios. Well, one is like business as usual. The other one is countries adopt their nationally determined contribution to address climate change. So that's the kind of almost baseline, let's say it. Then there is a more aggressive scenario in which, so in the paper it's called the industrial policy scenario. I didn't want to call it industrial policy because there was already another pan-industrial policy, but it's very much industrial policy, promoting certain sectors, investing in training, and also providing a lot of social protection. And then there is an even more aggressive scenario in which is kind of, the turbocharged version of the second scenario, even more in this thing. Now, all these numbers should be taken not with a grain, but with a truckload of salt, because they're based on very heroic assumptions. They're also based under the assumption that all these industrial policy work, and they're supposed to work. We had a discussion about this yesterday. And then a big thing about this stuff, it says, it assumes that the financing will be there. No clue from where the financing will come. But anyway, we take them as they are. So when you, so in this report, they study 3 countries plus 2 countries put together. I'm not sure why they put Algeria and Libya together, but that's the way. And these numbers that you see there are deviation in employment predicted for 2030 and 2050 under these 3 scenarios, like the national determined contribution scenario, some medium industrial policy scenario, and a full industrial policy scenario. So I will not, so these are jobs. I will not go in much details, but if you look at these numbers, you see that, for Egypt and Saudi Arabia, looks good, big increase in jobs under most scenarios. For the United Arab Emirates, it's not clear. In fact, jobs might even go down. Algeria and Libya somewhere in between. In total, the region, things should be good. Okay, so that's the first thing that comes from this simulation. The other thing, the simulation, they have very disaggregated analysis across sector, and you have, as you might expect, you have clear winners and losers when you look at cross sector. So these are an idea, but the water transport number at Algeria is wrong, but so the other one should be right. But as you can expect, the big loser are going to be the oil and gas. And then the winners, I mean, these assume a lot of alternative electricity. It assumes development of the hydrogen sector. So these are the big winners. So again, take this with a grain of salt. But as you can expect, there will be massive reallocation, and so labor market needs to be ready for this massive reallocation. So when you take things together, these are the scenarios. So first I gave you numbers, but clearly the country have very different population. These are percentages, percentage changes. So you've in Egypt, employment could go up all the way to 6%, if we believe in the numbers. Saudi Arabia, 4%. Again, Algeria and Libya actually might not go up. But in total, the number is positive, again, if we believe in this stuff. However, there are many things that make this region peculiar, and some of them are challenging. So this is, so Dina showed some number for Egypt about a very low participation of women in the labor market, but that's a more general problem in the region. So this is the share of women in the labor force. So if participation were equal, this should be 50%. It's not 50% anywhere. But if you go in East Asia and Pacific, it's 45%. In Latin America, it's about 40%. And in the world, it's 40%. And when you look at the various countries in the region, none of them is above the world average. So all the countries in the region underperform the world average, and the average for the region is low. It's about 20%. So that's a first fact. So again, it's not just an Egypt problem, but it's a problem for the region as a whole. The second thing is that unemployment rate is high. So again, if we compare with the world average, which is there are only 4 countries which are below the world average. So these are the United Arab Emirates, Bahrain, 3 countries, and Qatar. The other one is East Asian Pacific. So unemployment rate is high. And again, there are very large differences between the unemployment rate of men and women. So the blue bars are the women unemployment rate. The orange bar, the male unemployment rate. So you have 2 things. You have low labor market participation of women, and when they participate, the unemployment rate is very high. So there is like, a big unexploited part of the potential labor force, which is not there. This might be done, so this is an index of legal restriction to women unemployment, and again, this is an issue with the region in which, 0 is no restriction, 100 is maximum amount of restriction. So again, here there are some issues with the region. So it's the average for the region. And again, if you look down, that's the average for Latin America and the average for Eastern Europe or Central Asia. The only one who does relatively well, Morocco and the United Arab Emirates do relatively well, but the other countries, these legal restrictions are still fairly high. So again, this might be an explanation for the previous data. I'm not going to, so this, Tito talked quite a lot about this, so I'm going to skip this one. The other things in which the region tends to stand out is that there is a very large share of public sector employment. So again, down you see the average for East Asia and Pacific, for Latin America, and for Sub-Saharan Africa. That's the average for the Middle East. In some countries like Jordan, 40% of workers are employed in the public sector. So this is a very, so that's another thing in which the region tends to stand up. Finally, there is something about the public-private wage differential. So in most world studies from a study of the World Bank, the coverage is not great, and doing this is complicated because basically you run a regression, you control for education, but it's very hard to control for selection and this sort of stuff, but take them whichever way they are. In most regions, controlling for observable, public sector workers are paid more the workers in the private sector, again with Europe and Central Asia being the only country that doesn't fit this pattern. But again, there is a gender component here because in most regions, this public-private wage differential tends to be higher for women than for men. If you want to put it in terms of discrimination, I don't want to interpret in terms of discrimination, but anyway, so there is less discrimination in the public sector than in the private sector. Again, this region is the only country in which this pattern is reversed. And then another thing which makes some of the countries, these are the GCC countries, very different is that like massive share of foreign workers. So this is a GCC thing. Now, there are also great, so this is what makes the region a bit different, but there are also opportunities. Women enrollment in tertiary education, university education, tends to be high and increasing. So I think that's a very good signal. Now, there is a little bit of the issue, two issues here. One issue mentioned by Dina, that often this enrollment in universities is a little bit, like a parking lot. So people go to university because they're all finding job. That's not a great thing. And there is also a little bit the issue mentioned by Tito that we would like to see more people doing STEM. But the fact that there is this fairly high and an increase in enrollment, I take it as a good signal in a sense that probably there will be more people prepared for jobs that requires a higher level of education. So once I read this paper by Abhijit Banerjee, which was very interesting, that it basically was explaining how India became a leader in IT, and he said, it was kind of random. At some point, they opened all these universities which were training engineers, and this guy didn't really have a job, so they were there. But then, all this, the internet came out and all this thing, and, they had people ready to work as this. And so, it was not planned, it was kind of random. So maybe having this thing is not so great now, they're unemployed, but, if we will need more jobs that require higher education, it's good to have a large number of trained people. But of course, there should be made an effort, as both Dina and Tito mentioned, to have more people in STEM, more people that can benefit from changes. I mean, the region does also well in terms of AI readiness. To tell you the truth, I have no clue how these indexes measure. I took it from the World Economic Forum, but if you believe in the data, looks good. So, close to East Asian Pacific, much better than Latin America, so that's great, and most countries actually doing better than the average in Latin America. So that's good too. And so I'm going faster than expected, so you have more time because this is my last slide, penultimate slide. So this is about Lebanon. So I realize that Lebanon is not the largest country in the region, but I have a Lebanese wife, so I always find that I have to say something about Lebanon. So, and this is also something I guess was speak by Tito. I think there are a lot of opportunity in the diaspora, so it's not all brain drain. And the fact of having people abroad, and is certainly the case for Lebanon, but many other countries, the fact that they have people outside the country and very highly educated people. So for instance, these are people in the US. So this is based on a paper I did with Ricardo Hausmann, Carmen Reinhardt, and other co-authors. And we looked at US data. And for instance, when you look at Lebanese people in the US, they tend to be highly educated. Many more people with Lebanese origin who have a university degree than the overall average for the US. I wouldn't be surprised if this is the same thing for Egyptian. I mean, we don't have the data, but that's the case. And when you look at the distribution of what these people study, they kind of studied everything, from business, engineering, all sorts of things. And I didn't put the graph here. Also, if you look at where they work all sort of stuff. It is really a source of opportunity. You can create linkages. And again, with AI, as what my colleague ex-colleague, he abandoned us. Richard Baldwin called the globotics revolution narrows distances. So this is really an opportunity, as Tito said. So I'm going to conclude. So transition is inevitable, both the AI and the green transition, even though there are some people in a very large country who think that climate change is not an issue. I think it is. And we need policies for a better job, also to reduce inequality, and this requires investing even more in people. So I'll conclude here. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I think it was a very, well, before starting the session, I was a little bit worried because, as Samir said, there will be another conference next year here. And so I felt the competition. And I think this session was good at fighting the competition. The topic of labor market is fascinating in the MENA region because there are so many contradictions and opportunities. Contradiction. These countries have one of the youngest population. At the same time, they are the most rapidly aging economies. So there is a big contradiction there. These countries have a large immigration, but they have also some countries largest immigration. These countries have a large share of public employment, but at the same time, they have a large share of informality. So there are a number of contradictions in these labor markets. And I think that the new challenges that the panelists talk about have to be considered within this contradiction. And as always, this paradox offers some challenges, but also some opportunities. So my first question is, actually, I have two related questions. First, which policies can be done to take these opportunities, and which public policy, which we see this big challenge coming from AI, coming from digitalization, coming from rapidly aging, and at the same time, what can be done? Second is maybe there is an opportunity of leapfrogging. We always thought about problems and things holding back these countries, but at the same time, we have some new opportunities. One additional contradiction, which is very important, started with low level of especially female education, but as I think Ugo and Dina pointed out, there is a big increase in education now. So also there is a kind of paradox. So with this in mind, which policies and do you think that leapfrogging could be possible? And afterwards, it's open to the audience, of course. Okay. I think we start with this.
Okay. So thank you very much for this question. And it's actually very interesting to try to think what policies can actually allow this leapfrogging, if I actually put it this way. So opportunities are there, and the three of us have actually spoken about the opportunities that exist. It's now the question, how can these opportunities be leveraged in order to see this kind of leapfrogging that we are referring to? In my opinion, it's the triangulation of investments in human capital. So if I put it as education, training, skilling, and the more recent terminologies that are coming, reskilling and upskilling. So this is on one side, employment and labor market policies on the other side, and migration management on a third side. I cannot see that we can operate with one or the other. It has to be how we're looking at this dynamic of bringing the three policy directions together. How can we make sure that the labor market is informing education institutions of what skills are needed, how industrial policies, and this was the discussion that was happening yesterday, how can industrial policies help us actually see what future industries are booming, which industries are leading economic growth, and accordingly what skills are needed, and how can education systems actually take these skills into their curriculum, into their training programs, into education interventions in general. So the policies that I'm seeing, I'm not seeing one policy by itself, but I'm looking at the interconnection, or making sure that the three policy dimensions are tied together and are informing one another. Thank you.
This one. One of the contradictions that you are mentioning is the one related to the informality and the presence of public sector jobs. I think the informality is a very important issue to be tackled in these countries, because the fact that you have such a large informal sector is something that really would make it more difficult to manage the entire transition and all the challenges that you're facing. So one has to clearly understand the nature of this informality. People tend to think that informality is like, you know, when you talk about formal versus informal employment, is like a dichotomic word in which you have either black economy, totally black economy, or totally white economy. I don't think this is the right way to characterize the informal sector. Often the informal sector is a gray area where there is some legal part and some illegal part. So we call it cappuccino. It's not a coffee or milk. It's an intermediate condition. And that tells us that it is possible, actually, to change the characterization and gradually increase the legal part. So I think that working on these incentives to contribute, to become legal, thinking that it's a problem not only on the demand side, but also on the supply side is very, very, very important. That would increase the coverage of social insurance and can be also a powerful tool to deal with the other issue, which is very important in these countries, which is the low women participation in the labor market. There are clearly cultural reasons for this low participation of women in the labor market, and you know, we know how long it takes to change cultures. But there is also a problem of burden, which is disproportionately on women in these countries for the care of people, for you know, also the families, so these type of things, if you develop a social insurance system that provides support for all this type of risk, that would also reduce the burden being put on women. And, you know, we can have this double dividend whereby they work and there are also jobs being created for the care of people. So that type of mechanism is something that also could be started here, and I think it's something that should be addressed.
Thank you. Okay, I'm going to say something on which I don't want to repeat what Tito and Dina said, I agree, but I'm going to say something completely out of the box, maybe nonsensical, but let me try to put it there. So when you look at the region, countries are very different. They have very different level of income, they have very different level of unemployment, and there is a kind of integrated labor market, but it's not fully integrated. Like in Europe, we have, you know, we can go and work anywhere, but there are, as a minimum, big barrier, which are non-legal barrier, but they're linguistic barrier, right? If I want to go and work in Germany, I have to learn German. If I want to go to Sweden, I can go, but I have to learn. So here you have a region where, with different accent, but people mostly speak the same language, so you don't have that barrier. And there is a massive mobility across countries, at least across certain countries. But again, and I'm completely ignorant, but I think that when you move, you tend to lose this social protection. So maybe trying to have a more integrated labor market across the region maybe would be a way to address not all the problems. Again, the country are very, you cannot get employment for all the Egyptians. Egyptia is very big, but at least for central countries, and there is already a lot of movement. But so let me put it there. Try to say something out of the box.
Thank you, excellent. Should we start with Jihad? Actually, we are a number. Yeah.
Thank you very much. Excellent presentations. I have 3 specific questions. One on labor productivity that is one of the issues also why we are not producing more output. Therefore, what are your views on how to increase labor productivity in the region? The second is we saw recently in countries like the GCC, take the Saudi example, over the last 5 years, they were able to reduce unemployment to the lowest level over the last 3 decades and increase women participation from 14% to 36%. And mainly it was due to structural reforms. I would think that also the power of structural reforms is even more important in terms of providing opportunities for more jobs than policies that have to do with more type of industrial policy, for example. 3 is social protection. When you look at the pattern of spending, you see that spending on subsidies, for example, is double or triple of social protection. I would say what we consider the right type of social protection. The question is, how can you transition from a model where public spending is geared toward untargeted, biased type of spending to something that is more structured? And the last point is, Antonio was mentioning the question of leapfrogging. Those are transformational reforms. How fast one could go, realistically, in changing some of the fundamental elements of economic management. Thank you.
Right. Thank you so much. My name is Mahmoud, and let me build on the Jihad's comments and congratulate the 3 speakers for their good points that they shared with us. One on the leapfrogging and the industrial policy, and building on the discussion that we had yesterday as well. Back in 1961, Kennedy, when he visited NASA, started the moonshot. 1961 in Egypt, we had an experiment to shoot the moon itself by nationalization. And those who are being pushing for industrial policy that is relying more on state, I admire my good friend Mariana Mazzucato when she put the ideas related to reforms based on entrepreneurial state. But we have a great deal of experience, more than 60 years of failure with few interruptions. So I would very much put that in a context of political economy, the incentives, and exactly what went wrong. And Egypt could really benefit us from many of the bad ways that the state intervened. The second thing, where the state should be intervening on the infrastructure, on the employment policy, on the institution reforms. And this basically should take care of what Dina mentioned on 2 matters, one on the labor policy, employment policy, and the second on migration. When I talk about employment policy in my country here, there is no counterpart. There is a Ministry of Labor Force that is basically a ministry for public relations with public enterprise workers. We have no employment strategy, no employment policy. This is based again on the old ways of doing things, assuming that you will grow fast and high. Okun's law will be doing the magic, and you will be employing people. You have nobody who would really say, I'm worried or concerned, or there are opportunities for AI. Can somebody take care of that? You can really see some sectoral interests like the Ministry of CIT, the Communication Information Technology, but we don't really have an employment policy. Her good points about migration. Migration had been dancing between ministry. Now it's landing with the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, and I don't think that the Minister of Foreign Affairs would be interested to address issues related to migration policy in the way that she mentioned. So there is an institutional gap. Second point on the readiness. And I think we need really to have, for AI, I think this was raised by Tito and by Ugo as well. There is a great deal of discrepancy because indices like the one developed by the IMF and the Preparedness Index, the Stanford one, is different from WEF index, but it's the region. Only 6 countries plus 2, GCC, Morocco, and Jordan are doing better than others. The rest of us are not doing that good. Anyways, that gets me into the final point about the social protection issue. We know more or less in this region, and particularly in Egypt, how to deal with those who need support when it comes to low-income groups and the extremely poor. When it comes to middle class, which could be impacted by all of these disruption, transitions of green or transition of digitalization, we don't really have a good policy. I wonder if Tito can share with us some good examples of countries that were exposed to shocks and did a better job in dealing with this issue of social protection and insurance for them. Thank you.
We have a question there.
Good morning, everyone. First of all, I wanted to thank all brilliant presentations today. I wanted to pick up actually on the point that Dina mentioned with regards to demographics and demographic growth. This took me back to 30 years ago as a student at AUC, not literally in this hall, of course, but figuratively, and in Tahrir, when we were exposed to Malthus's population growth theory. Now, of course, resources grow linearly, population grows exponentially. In the 80s and the 90s, the model for growth in a lot of countries in the world was import substitution. That went out of fashion. The world headed towards export promotion in the 90s, maybe in the 2000s, even the 2010s and so on. And then lately, of course, we have what I call, and you used the triple T acronym. I call it the Trump's triple threat. Tariff wars, which is the trade war basically, tech war, and the territory war. And there's no need to go into any of those. I think they're obvious to everyone. The question becomes, where do we go from here? Do we go to import substitution once again? Is industrial policy the new look for import substitution? Are we, when we talk about localization, ICV, and so on, are we really not talking about substituting some of the imports that we import in the MENA region? That's one point. The second point actually goes to Ugo's point with regards to the employment in the public sector. I took note that Jordan was 40% of the employment in Jordan was in the civil service or the public employment. I remember leaving Jordan in 2005, the statistic was around 30 or 35%. So that, I believe, is actually a characteristic of two things. One of them is a market failure of sorts, unfortunately, where you have Jordan is one of the highest tax rates in the region. If you factor in value-added tax, income tax, property tax, all the different tariffs, all those different taxes on people. So that's one. The second one is, and this is characteristic of other countries in the GCC, the benefits given under the civil service laws in some countries surpass those under labor laws. So if you think of human beings as economic agents, it's perfectly rational in some of those countries to wait for the perfect job. And this is not for Jordan, but for other countries, to wait for that perfect dream job, which is going to give you higher pensions, it's going to give you much less challenges in getting promoted. It's promotion by tenure as opposed to promotion by benefits, and other factors. So shouldn't there be some work from the public policy perspective on reducing some of those gaps? Well, thank you.
Good morning. Thank you for the excellent presentations. Now I just have like three quick comments. The first comment is regarding the definition of green jobs. I think the definition of green jobs. There is a challenge when it comes to the definition of green jobs. And I think, for example, if we want to talk about green jobs, we have to talk about, for example, the green GDP. And there was an initiative when I was in the Ministry of Planning to estimate the green GDP in Egypt. I think the numbers that Dina has mentioned about the green jobs, which is 7.8%, this is quite underestimated, and I'm going to tell you why. According to official figures, the green investment in Egypt as a percentage of public investment is around 30 to 35%. So it will be quite difficult to assume that only 7.8% of jobs are green in Egypt. There is another thing about the restrictiveness of the way that was defined according to the paper that I think that you have used. For example, let's take the case of a driver in a subway in Egypt. This driver is, I'm going to reduce it. This driver is contributing to the reduction of CO2 emission. So it is a green job by definition. So just I want to emphasize the point that it is extremely important because a good economic analysis starts from data. So if we have problems when it comes to the measurement of the data and the measurement of the definition of green jobs and green GDP, I think this is something that we should look at, and the statistical agencies in the MENA region, I think they have to, and with the help of, for example, METAC, they have to work on that. Second point about women participation. Women participation in Egypt, it's very low, as you have indicated. It's around, I think it's even less than what you have put, it's around 16, 17%. This is why one of the inspiration, it was put for the government of Egypt to reach a 40% by the year 2030. Now, imagine, I think this is extremely important. Imagine what's the women participation rate if it increases to 40%. What's going to happen to poverty in Egypt? What's going to happen to the rate of population growth in Egypt? What's going to happen to the growth of GDP? So we should, and by the way, all of these women, most of them, they are educated. So it's not a problem of education, it's a problem of this idea of they participate in the labor force. Third point about the informality, and this is maybe associated with Jihad's point. Now, according to the statistics, 50% of labor force in Egypt are informal. And they only contribute to 30% of GDP. This is official figures. So this tells us that we have a problem of productivity when it comes, of course, when it comes to Egypt. And this is because of the informality that is happening in Egypt, and I think in lots of MENA region, as it was indicated. The last thing that I want to point it out is that there are some countries in the MENA region, they are very much investing in AI. And a prominent example of this is the United Arab Emirates. So I think this is something that it has to be looked at, and I don't know whether the data is showing, maybe this is something recent, but this is something that we should point it out and we should see what they are doing and what is the effect of these things. Thank you very much.
Thank you. We have a hard constraint at 11, so if you have no question? Yeah, very quick, and afterwards.
Thank you for very insightful presentations. So you all touched on informality, which is a very big issue in the region. And my question is, of course, we all understand what are the issues with that, or what are the concerns, you know, skipping the tax net, the vulnerabilities that they create for workers, the drag on productivity, etc. But maybe it would be helpful if you can give your views on whether there are any sort of advantages for having an informal sector that acts as a shock absorber precisely because of the flexibility that it embeds, and whether there is any evidence of this in the MENA and or more globally. And that's thank you.
Thank you. We have 3 minutes for each speaker. It's very difficult.
Very challenging to address this in 3 minutes. So I'll try as much as possible to hint on so many of the points that were covered. Labor productivity, I think Dr. Ahmed Kamali led it very beautifully. Informality, and I'll add to it mismatch. So not only that we have informality, but we also have a great deal of mismatch in terms of field of study, but also in terms of skills. So we have under-education or under-qualification, over-qualification. This is also affecting productivity. Dr. Mahmoud's comments on the 80s and 90s, and I'll connect this to the other remark that is related to import substitution and the localization of industry. I think also we have adopted the import substitution before, but we have adopted the import substitution in a way that we did not capitalize on our competitive advantage. So we decided that we're just simply going to produce everything locally at any cost, and this has cost us a lot. So moving forward, I do believe more of an industrial policy with an export promotion policy, identifying where do we have our competitive advantage, and having this feed into, again, the education system and the training and implementing the skills would attempt to address the productivity issues as well. I'll get to Asma's questions. The advantages of informality as a shock absorber. I do believe in Egypt we saw this during COVID. So we saw a great deal of shock absorption from the informal sector side. One of the reasons that were identified that at the start of COVID, Egypt was not hit hard was definitely because of the reforms that Egypt has started on before that, but also because of a lack of a complete lockdown, because the informal sector was supporting the economy. So there were examples, and I would say the most recent of them was during COVID.
Okay, so very intriguing and enriching questions. Unfortunately, 3 minutes, so very, very, very quickly. How to move from a design of a social protection to another type? Not easy. Of course, I would need to know way more than what I know right now about the specifics, and I know that social protection system differs across countries. But one way is clearly to grandfather existing entitlements and move on a generational basis, by clearly changing the rules and increasing the contributory component. So people contributing get entitlements, which is a different type of thing. An advantage of these countries is that they have also private redistribution, which is operating pretty well. So for religious regions, there are transfers and support for poor families that have been provided on a private basis, and that may relieve a bit the task of the government to do this type of things. But clearly more has to be known about that. Informal sector, a shock absorber, that has been working very much in various shocks, not during COVID. In COVID, there's been a disaster for the informal sector everywhere. So I think, we have to be aware of the fact that, there are these advantages sometimes in having an informal economy, but not always, and the disadvantages may be larger. But again, the issue is, again, a gradual movement to. Finally, a couple of considerations about the two other contradictions that Antonio was mentioning. First of all, immigration, emigration. I think it has to do clearly with the different type of skills that are required. Immigration involves high skills. There is a flourishing middle class in these countries that can find better jobs elsewhere. And at the same time, given that job creation is very much in construction and relatively low skill components, that calls for immigration from other countries. I think that is the mechanism. And having sometimes some outflow of people doesn't mean having outflows of ideas, and may be a way in the future for these countries to increase the demand for also skilled jobs and therefore retain people here rather than having them to migrate elsewhere. And finally, I think on the public sector and the informality is not so much a contradiction. It's something we see in many other countries. Large public sector means large informal sector, because public sector jobs are often a way to transfer resources, to redistribute. So families have a public sector job and the rest is informal. So the two things go hand in hand. And reducing the size of the public sector may be also important to make the jobs in the private sector more formal, because then is something that you need to become more efficient in general.
So I'm going to pick exactly where Tito ended, because I think I can try to tie three questions exactly on the public sector thing. So this is based on two caveats. So I'm going to say something based on some research I did about the public sector labor market, but two caveats. Number one, it was about Latin America, not this region, and number two was more than 20 years ago. So, but having said that, and there is also a very nice paper, I'm sure, Tito, you know about Italy by Alberto Alesina and Massimo Rostagno, which exactly says what Tito was saying. There are very large negative spillover of a dysfunctional public sector labor market. Number one, because people are waiting for the perfect job, exactly. And this is very typical of Southern Italy as well. And it creates a very high reservation wage, so then people don't enter. So, so in a sense, when you look at Latin America, so Jihad had asked about social protection and Mahmoud about the middle class. When you look at Latin America, public sector jobs are actually the main social protection mechanism for the middle class. It's an incredibly inefficient way to provide social protection. It's not targeted. It gets some people. It generates political patronage. But when I studied what happened to public sector wages during the big crisis in Latin America, they remain, while the private sector go down and the public sector remains more or less constant. And then, this provides some social protection because these are families, but it's not what I would recommend to do it, because it's not the best way to do it. The other thing that I learned when I did this work about Latin America, about the public sector labor market in Latin America, and maybe this is linked to productivity. I don't know if it answers the productivity thing, but so when you look at the way in which the wage distribution in the public sector work, there's a very strong link between wage compression in the public sector. So if you look at the distribution of wages in the public sector, it's much more compressed than in the private sector. But there is differences across country, and countries which have much more compressed public sector wages, as you might expect, they have a public sector which is lower quality. And again, if you think that having a good public sector, as discussed yesterday, is a big impact to productivity, so that might be another thing. So, but of course there are a million of other stuff, but I think that's might be a unifying theme, which is important in this region, because this is a region with a large public sector.
Thank you very much. We finished just in time for a very informative section, I think. Thank you.
Thank you, Antonio, for sticking on time, and thank you for the panelists. Only a panel that has 3 Italians will bring a reference to cappuccino. So thank you so much. We have, and we have now a 15-minute break, and then we can start the closing panel after that. So thank you. May I please ask you to start regaining your seats, please? Thank you so much. We are already 5 minutes late. Can you please start regaining your seats? Thank you. Can you please, we're running a bit late. I apologize. I know there is a lot of discussions and reflections. So I ask you kindly to, because we're awaiting. Can you please, thank you. You can bring your food to the table if you want. President, okay. قلنا له. So this is the session before the last in this very extensive program that we had, and it's a closing panel, and Oh my God. So I'm going to ask the photographers, please, to leave so we can start. Thank you. So as I was saying, this is the closing panel, and it has the title of A Way Forward, MENA, for a Changing World. And I would like to first, before we start, acknowledge the arrival of Her Excellency, Dr. Rania Al-Mashat, Minister of Minister of Planning and Economic Development at International Corporation, and Mr. Nigel Clark, the Deputy Managing Director of the IMF. So without further ado, I want to introduce Vivek Aroa, who's going to be moderating. It's not you? It's Nigel? So Nigel is going to, whoa, that's a very, I was not aware, this is not what I have in my notes. So Nigel is going to be moderating this session. He's the Deputy Managing Director since very recently, October 2024. Before that, he served as the Jamaica's Ministry of Finance and the Public Service and the Member of Parliament. Prior to that, he served as Ambassador of Economic Affairs, and he served as the Chairman of Board of Governance of the Inter-American Development Bank. He has started his career as an equity derivatives trader at Goldman Sachs in London. So Nigel, the floor is yours, please. Please. And I also want to invite to the podium Barry. Is he here? Yeah. And also want to invite Mr. Yusuf Boutros-Ghali. He's the member of the Specialized Council for Economic Development. He's appointed by Egypt's president. He served at several senior positions in the Egyptian government, including as Minister of State for International Cooperation and the Council of Ministers, Minister of State for Economic Affairs, Minister for the Economy, and finally, Minister of Finance. He was the chairman of the International Monetary Fund and Financial Committee at the IMF. He taught at Cairo University and an our institution, the Cairo American University. I also want to invite François Bourguignon, who is currently visiting NYU Abu Dhabi as the Global Professor of Economics. He is an Emeritus Professor of Economics at Paris School of Economics. He is the he's the director of the Paris School from 2017 to 2013. Prior to that, he was the chief economist and the vice president of the World Bank from 2003 to 2007. He has most of his academic career in the School of Advanced Studies in Social Sciences in Paris. He's actively involved in the International Development Community, advising leading international agencies and government. He has published extensively on poverty and inequality in both developing and advanced economies. So with that, with this very prestigious panel, it's scheduled for 1 hour and 15 minutes, so I'll leave it to you, Nigel, to start. Thank you. Oh, I think I apologize for that. It seems that my notes were not updated. And you can introduce him? Okay, thank you. Oh, so Martin Glastian, he's the Central Bank of Armenia. Thank you so much.
Good afternoon, everyone. It's always difficult to speak after, just before lunch. They say you don't want to be between someone and their meal. So the task is going to be for this panel to make sure we can keep you engaged. Welcome to this final panel discussion in this inaugural conference, MENA conference, the first of many, hopefully to come, and fittingly here at the American University in Cairo. The conference thus far has highlighted the complexity and the interconnectedness of global and regional challenges amidst high degrees of uncertainty. Replacing fiscal buffers, steering monetary policy, maintaining financial stability, accommodating climate change and adjusting to rapid technological development. Over the course of the past 2 days, one thing has certainly emerged, and that is there are no easy nor quick solutions. However, the degree of expertise that exists in the Middle East and North African region, and that's represented here in this room this afternoon, is such that there's optimism for the future. So in this panel discussion, we want to look forward and not backward, and to leave here with a policy framework for how countries of the region can grapple with the challenges that they confront. But first, it is my distinct pleasure to introduce the distinguished panel, and I want you to give them a round of applause when I introduce each of them. And I'm going to go in the order here. First, to introduce Francois, who is a visiting professor at NYU Abu Dhabi in economics, and who is an emeritus professor at the Paris School of Economics, and was chief economist and vice president at the World Bank from 2007 to 2013. Please give him a round of applause. Introducing Youssef at the end. Youssef is a former Minister of Finance here in Egypt between 2004 and 2011, I believe, and someone who serves on the President's Special Counsel for Economic Development. He was at the IMF for some time. Please give him a warm welcome. And then Barry, who is a professor of economics and political science at the University of California in Berkeley. That's a long, long way away, and who has written extensively on exchange rates, on sovereign debt, on capital flows, and is an expert in all of these areas. Please give Barry a warm welcome. And Martin, the central bank governor of Armenia, who also teaches at the American University in Armenia. Please give him a warm welcome. So what we're going to do is I'm going to throw out a question, the same question, to each of the panelists, and we'll hear their response, and we can, we can score them. And then we'll ask individual questions to each. So the first question is, with the climate that exists of global uncertainty, the policy response has to take into consideration a number of factors. And inevitably, there are going to be trade-offs. So the question is, how do policymakers, confronted by these challenges and these trade-offs, how do they strike the right balance? And probably go in order of Barry. You want to take that first?
So I think policymakers have to start by recognizing, by acknowledging that they are now in a more volatile, more uncertain, more difficult environment, and that they need to think about policy diversification along a number of different dimensions in terms of trade, in terms of finance, in terms of the composition of the export basket, because I think dependence on a single market, single set of activities is especially problematic in the current environment.
Okay, I guess that my answer to that question would be that given the mounting uncertainty, policymakers should try to think about all types of insurance mechanism that could be developed so that in case of a very adverse shock on the economy, then the population will not be too much affected. And we know that in most developing and emerging countries, those mechanisms are little developed. And I would say that this is certainly a very good opportunity to try to think in that direction.
So I think there are a couple of things that we need to think about. One, I think we need to have a paradigm shift in our mindset. And I'll borrow something from the world of sports. So we shouldn't be asking for less challenges, but we should be asking for more skills. So how do we counteract this uncertainty? I think we counteract it with credible policies in place. And what do credible policies mean from my perspective? It means a couple of things. First and foremost, one would be the credible frameworks, both for fiscal, monetary, financial stability, whatever comes with that, because we need to overcome the layering of crises which are unprecedented. So the only thing you can do is to build the trust, and then trust comes from the frameworks and credibility that you build. The second thing will be building the buffers during the good times, which can be used during the bad times. So those are two things that in combination would give you some credibility to overcome the obstacles in the future.
Thank you. Okay, Youssef?
Well, we need to find out first why we are in a world of uncertainty. We're in a world of uncertainty because the previous system that used to rule the global economy, namely globalization, did not benefit everybody. Some people were left out. These people got upset. And we had the shift towards more right-wing policies and nationalism, protectionism, etc., which causes now push towards a change in the world order. Now we have to recognize the world order is going to change, and what do we want instead? So what we'll be looking for now is, one, a new safe asset. The old safe asset is no longer safe, is no longer trusted. A second, somebody to lead the new process. We are all of us should be attached to the rule-based system that used to exist. But obviously, the rules were not fair to everyone. Now we need to amend it. Will the rule-based system that we would like to have be all-encompassing? Does everybody have to be in, or do people want to opt out? I suspect some will want to opt out, some not too small. A country will want to opt out. Well, fine. But we have to prepare ourselves to rebuild the rule-based system along the lines that is slightly fairer, slightly more transparent, slightly more effective, and therefore, then we can start talking about a new system and see where we fit in the new system, how we want it to serve our countries, how we want to serve our people. But first, we have to think of what kind of world order we want instead of the one that just collapsed.
Thank you. So let me just ask more specific questions. And I want to start with you again, Barry. We understand, as Martin just mentioned, that we need to build buffers to ensure that shocks can be absorbed. And in a fiscal sense, building buffers requires a certain degree of fiscal consolidation. lowering debt ratios, etc. But at the same time, some of the problems of the region cannot be confronted without growth and without development. So how should policymakers navigate that trade-off between the need for consolidation on the one hand and the need on the other hand to support growth and development through fiscal policies?
So Youssef and I were beginning to talk about this earlier this morning, so maybe I will leave the sequencing question to him. Nigel, in a way, is asking me to unveil my secret plan for debt consolidation around the world. I wish I had one. Obviously, the circumstances have grown more difficult, as we spoke about yesterday and was alluded to just now, that the real interest rate, growth rate differential, the intrinsic debt dynamics have turned in a less favorable direction. The hard lifting has become harder. Beyond that, I would say different countries have to navigate this problem in different ways. Again, repeating something that was said yesterday, I don't think the solution for all the countries in the region is to cut spending on social programs. I was looking at the case of Egypt briefly this morning, where the problem really appears to be revenue shortfall, that Egypt punches below its weight in terms of taxation and other revenues, and if it wants to stabilize the debt ratio and begin to grow out from under a debt that, depending on the year you look at it, is 80, 90, 95% of GDP, it has to do a lot of the work on the revenue side by broadening the tax base and improving the efficiency of tax administration and all that. So, Nigel, you mentioned that some other people on the panel had been at the IMF. As a summer intern at the IMF in 1977, my very first published paper was one of those tax effort papers that Fiscal Affairs is doing pretty much every year.
So, but Barry, I'm not going to let you off that easily. You know, you come from a country where raising taxes is associated with an attack on growth. So how you mentioned Egypt, so let me go with you there. How does Egypt engage in domestic revenue mobilization, increasing revenues as a share of GDP, without it having an impact, a negative impact on growth on the one hand, and on the other hand, without it causing social dislocation?
Well, number one, by using the revenues raised effectively in a way that supports growth rather than spending the revenues unproductively, and giving the population a sense that the burden of taxation is shared.
Okay, so yes, how it is done is important. Barry, you mentioned buffers, so I want to come to you next. On the monetary side, there are trade-offs there too that central banks in the region have to navigate. On one hand, countries need financial stability. People need price stability. But at the same time, we need economies to expand. And sometimes, as you know, as a practitioner in the field, there's a conflict between those two objectives that the central bank has to navigate. And that's the case at all times. But particularly in this moment of history, how would you recommend that central banks navigate these particular objectives, and how do they balance the trade-offs that are involved?
So I think you need to have two distinct toolkits for both policies, because we are the central bank which is responsible both for financial stability and monetary policy. and that is done through a unitary board, so we don't have separate bodies making decisions on different policies. But we do have a distinct toolkit for both. So in terms of financial stability, you have a macroprudential toolkit in place, which provides kind of an assurance that banking sector or financial sector is well functioning, it's well capitalized, and then there is liquidity enough to provide services to public at large. So in that sense, I think what we did during the good times, we increased the countercyclical capital buffer by 175 basis points, just to benefit from the good times. And then we think that that is enough kind of a capital to counteract if something unexpected happens in the future. Second thing related to the monetary policy front, I think we moved to inflation targeting since 2006. And then from 2006 to 2020, our inflation rate, medium inflation rate, was around 4%, which was our target. So it means like the tool serves us very well. But at the same time, in 2020, we had the war with neighboring Azerbaijan. And then we had COVID, and then Russia, Ukraine. And then we distinctly understood that what served us well during those years is not going to take us any further. So we changed the framework. So we had this FPAS Mark I framework in place, forecasting and policy analysis system in place. But we moved to FPAS Mark I. So we moved away from baseline forecast. So we moved to something which we called a prudent risk management approach. So board deliberately talks about multiple scenarios, and then board decides after contemplating with multiple scenarios. So that was a cautious and distinct move from our side. I mean, we tried it for 3 years. We went out to academics like John Taylor, Larry Summers, and many other people to criticize us for our framework. We heard their criticism, but we did what we think is necessary in this kind of circumstances. And we did second thing, which was probably, goes to Christine's point. So we were probably the first country in the world to start raising the interest rate when our inflation was well below the target. So it was December 2020, when a lot of central banks were still contemplating about transitory nature of inflation, demand, supply, whatever comes with it. We said, no, we need to build credibility, and that is a distinct nature of an emerging market central bank. We don't take our credibility easy, so we cherish that. That's why we're trying to have the best frameworks in place and to counteract actively. And the second thing, which is important, I think, for everyone to listen to, is that we moved to this phase where we decided to be completely open. So we do 3 things after each board meeting. We publish attributed votes, we publish attributed minutes the same day, and each single board member publishes 1-pager explaining his or her thinking about the situation. So it gives the market the sense what was happening in the boardroom during the discussion.
No, I think that deserves a round of applause, honestly. Now, you said some very important things there. I mean, first of all, you're way ahead of the curve. Pierre Olivier, he's been doing multiple scenarios for the last 20 years. That's absolutely fantastic. And then you mentioned the importance of credibility, central bank credibility, and transparency, which I think are extremely important. But I want to ask you, you have successfully transitioned to inflation targeting. How do countries that are engaged in that exercise now deal with their populations who have had the exchange rate as the nominal anchor for decades? How do they suddenly change that anchor to inflation? What are the communication strategies that are required? What are the engagement strategies that are required? How would you, in the theme that we have about going forward, how would you advise those who have to do that going forward?
Start by changing government.
Hold your horses. Coming to you.
So probably, I think there is a political economy aspect to that. So in a sense, central bank governor can do just a little bit of things. Though you might have all the toolkit in place, but if you are not in line with your government, and then you don't coordinate your fiscal monetary things, and there is also this fiscal dominance thing in the country, and then you are the one who should be blamed for everything in the country. I think no central bank governor would take a risk to do that, otherwise if he's not suicidal in nature. But I think if there is a good intention in place for the government to take the country forward, then they need to have a full trust in independent central bank, because credibility of the central bank and then low inflation is the basis for investment in the country. And that's why you reach the productivity paradigm. So if you have an understanding with your government or the president on those basics, then the rest is a matter of technique.
Fantastic, excellent. So, Francois, I want to come to you next. You look deep in thought. You're going to share those thoughts with us. You know, we focus a lot, you know, on stabilization is important, but stabilization has to serve a purpose. It can't be an end in itself. But we find that for stabilization to serve a purpose, things like labor market rigidities and competition and other structural reforms are required to be built on top of a stable economy. In countries of large populations, complex societies, complex political economy, how do countries going forward in the Middle Eastern and North African region contend with the requirements, the structural reform requirements in practice and reality? How do we get those done?
I wish I had an answer to that question. And I think that everybody here wish to have an answer to that question. But I would say that the most important thing is to make sure that the right questions are being asked, and the right or the obstacles toward development, toward the faster growth, have been truly and clearly identified, and there has been some communication with the public opinion about exactly what is important and in what direction the reform should go. This is not always the case. I mean, we talk about industrial policy is not what it should be, macro policy or fiscal policy is not what it should be. But the point that we need to have an area where focus points on which we can converge and which are the common denominator of most policies, even when we think about stabilization policies, to always keep in mind this kind of common denominator. I think that here, this morning, we had a lot of discussion about the labor market in the MENA region. Clearly, this is a big issue. It was said that there is something odd in having such a low participation rate in these countries, which this low participation rate is so much loss of GDP. And this is so much loss in revenues. So maybe this would be a kind of focus point on which policies in general should be converging, saying, okay, we want to improve that. We want to improve, for example, the women labor force participation in countries where, moreover, fertility has gone down. So we may expect that women labor force participation should go up. And this is not the case. So what is going on? And I think that mobilizing the opinion around this kind of issue is something important. And to continue on the labor market, why is it the case that we have this youth unemployment? It is a symptom of something wrong in the labor market. And the something wrong, which has very much to do with the issue of informality, is the fact that most likely there is a wage rate or working conditions in the formal labor market or in the public sector in particular, which are much too high to some extent. And people are simply waiting until a job will be available in those sectors. And if they wait too long, at some stage they will go to the informal labor market. In that case, the informality is not voluntary, it is involuntary. And from that point of view, and Ugo this morning was referring to Latin America, to a large extent, informality is voluntary, simply because you want to issue taxation, contribution, etc., etc. Here, it is not the case. So again, this is a kind of focus that should be common to all policy reflection and should be shared very widely in the population, thinking this is the area, the correction that we want to make.
Right, this is compelling. Can you talk a little bit about competition? Because we know that competition is important for efficient allocation of resources. How do we entrench competition in MENA societies, or further entrench?
No, this is, again, a very good question. And again, in the morning, there was a lot of references to the issue of the public sector, the importance of the public sector. And the public sector is important not only, it is not only the government sector, but it's also all the public companies, or companies which are presumably private, but which are very much linked to the government. And it is true that this is really going against competition. But this is something that should be put on the table. But then we are getting into something more important, which is we're getting into the political economy. Behind this structure of the production sector in MENA countries, but not only, of course, in MENA countries, in many other countries, we have a political economy in the sense that we have an elite or part of the elite which is trying to maintain its dominance in some parts of the economy. And it is very difficult to put on the table this issue of competition without putting our fingers, without showing explicitly who is owning what and who is controlling what. And I have no answer to that except for the fact that maybe, hopefully, Youssef just said we have to change government, or we have to have politicians who are at some stage able to say this is exactly what is going on.
Right, you're saying transparency is inherent to having a competitive society, and we need to lift the veil. Youssef, the world is undergoing significant technological change, but even before this era, we know of the concept of a digital divide between countries and within countries. How do policymakers ensure that in this period of rapid technological change, large segments of populations are not left behind?
Well, the short answer is motion. You need to keep moving. Most of our countries move slowly or stagnate. The only way to get the country forward, to have it absorb technology, absorb progress, raise the standards of living, improve productivity in the system, is through motion. And motion means growth. I was just discussing with Barry a minute ago about the sequencing of whether we implement stabilization policies, fiscal, monetary, etc., to generate growth, or whether we generate growth first with the distortions, with the imbalances, and then operate into an improvement in the financial balances, etc. Our choice, what we did in Egypt, and I have a number of friends who participated with me in the room, and I would love to hear their comments. What we did, we had the same problem. We had an economy that was sclerotic, that had all sorts of obstacles, administrative, etc., policy. We could not change the fiscal, monetary, and other policies without motion. So we decided to go for motion first. And we chose a sector, namely exports, concentrated support in that sector. We changed the image of the government into the world and projected an image of reform. We took one measure. One measure was reducing customs tariffs from a weighted average of 40% to a weighted average of 15%. That immediately established credibility of the group in charge. And we had an immediate response for foreign direct investment that came in and generated the growth we needed to be able to introduce the reduction in the budget deficit, a reduction in debt to GDP, an improvement in competition, and all of the other things. The essence was push the machine first and then change direction. You can't change direction on a machine that's stopped. So, and we went from foreign direct investment of 500 million, this was in 2004, 500 million, mostly in the oil sector, to 7 billion in 1 year, mostly in the non-oil sector, mostly greenfield, mostly new investors from abroad. That gave us the opportunity to be able to then start raising taxes, changing the budget, reducing spending, etc., etc., etc. So the essence, if I am going to capture what is happening in the rest of the world, if I am going to capture an improvement in productivity like the rest of the world is going to experience once computers start coming in, AI starts coming in, etc., I have to keep moving. And the only option, I think, for the emerging world today to keep moving is to connect with the rest of the world economy. Unfortunately, we come at the wrong time because there is a trend of protectionism triggered by all sorts of policies initially, but there's a trend of protectionism. Everybody's afraid. Everybody has an industrial policy. An industrial policy means you're going to close up on yourself. You're going to insist that the factory that was producing bits and pieces in Taiwan and China and Egypt, etc., and all of it to be assembled in, say, Germany, now they'll all want the car to be done in Germany or to be done in God knows where else. So, but the key is keep open to the rest of the world, connect with the rest of the world, get the growth coming in from outside into your economy, and then you'll be able to absorb technology, introduce, get rid of the informal market, well, get rid of the informal market, maybe not, but reduce the informal market and get the economy moving. The essence is motion. Keep moving.
So here we have Newton's fourth law of economic motion. Very interesting thesis. On that note about motion, it is said that economies where the state dominates tend to be economies that don't have vitality, innovation, resources aren't allocated efficiently. But the transition from an economy where the state dominates the means and the means of production into one where private agents play a greater role can be challenging. And we have a laboratory of results over the past few decades of countries that have tried different approaches. At this time, countries that want to embark upon that transition, countries like Egypt that need to embark upon that transition, one, how would you advise them to go about it? And two, how do we, is there a danger that it's a simple box ticking exercise and you pick 30 entities and you transfer them and expect magic? Or are there companion measures that have to go with the change in ownership to make it work?
So Nigel is asking me about divestment because we're here in Cairo and the country is undergoing, as we speak, a process of the government divesting itself of important public enterprises. So I'll come to your question in one moment after I make a parenthetical remark. I feel like I'm struggling a little bit. I sense the audience must sense that I'm struggling a little bit because it's hard to answer these questions at a high level of abstraction in a way that applies to all of the relevant countries. That I think we know some general principles about where we want to end up. Martin talked about inflation targeting, central banks that regulate the financial system well. We know that we want the budget to be balanced over the cycle and to be used in a counter-cyclical way. We know about the kind of competition policies that will ensure a robust market economy. But we know much less about how to get from here to there, and I would insist that how to get from here to there depends on country circumstances, economic and political both. So I'm reluctant to give advice to Egypt on something like that divestment because I've only been here for 36 hours. And the audience knows more about the economic and political particulars than I do. So having just described why I shouldn't make general statements about how to navigate this process, I would make the general statement that we have a lot of evidence that when you're divesting or privatizing large, substantially sized enterprises, you need to do a lot of preparation. And I think that's what Nigel's framing of the question implied, that you need financial reporting requirements that ensure that the private that when the enterprise passes into private hands, its affairs are visible to the investing public and others, shareholder rights, reasonably well-functioning financial markets, and putting those prerequisites in place often takes time. That's the lesson I draw from privatization in the transition economies, that large-scale privatization done quickly creates more problems than it solves.
Thank you. I think you should give him a round of applause. A distinguished professor with such intellectual humility. It's good to see. All right, we're going to open up questions to the audience, and I'll give you. Oh, you're ready to go. All right. Do we have a microphone?
Right. Thank you so much, Nigel. And I like very much what you started with, that we need in this particular session. After a great 2 days we had to emphasize the picture for the future, to be more forward-looking. And before you spoke, I put forward-look, and you put look forward, so almost the same. Our chief mechanic, Dr. Yusuf Boutros-Ghali, called on some of us to complement what he said. This is basically what he was known for many years when he served our country well. As a chief mechanic, he was responsible for repairing and maintaining the engines. But now we are going through tough times, not just because of the global dynamics, but many regions today are rediscovering the beauty of neighborhood. Europe is rediscovering itself. African continent, and we are part of it. The Mediterranean. Unfortunately, I wouldn't say the same about the Middle East because of the tough political and violence in some corner there. But let me borrow on that forward-look approach what we need really from the politicians of the future, from the policymakers of the future. And the future is very much near. This is basically in the case of Egypt, after the end, I hope successfully, of the current IMF program that should end by, I hope, November 2026. Naturally, you would be expecting from this country to have an alternative program to really assure the investors, the exporters, and more importantly, the general public about the continuity of reforms when it comes to the macroeconomic stability. And that needs to be communicated well. The second part, I would borrow from the managing director of the IMF when she was addressing the countries of the region when she was at the government summit. She mentioned the 3 Ds of diversification, and I think many countries in our region are doing their best. I admire what our brothers in the GCC, Morocco and Jordan in particular, are doing, despite the fact that they do not really have the same endowment of diversification like Egypt, but they are doing a great job on that one. The second D she mentioned is digitalization, and we spent a couple of sessions at least talking about digitalization and AI as a proxy of the new world, and this requires huge investments. And here, I think we need really to have something to do with the D that she didn't mention, the demographics. We have a great demographic dividend in this region, and I think she didn't mention that D, although that her third D was the
question.
Yeah, the question, well, I will ask the question now. The third D is basically the issue of deregulation. And this is basically on how to do deregulation in a way that can really address the political economy dynamics properly. Dr. Yusuf and I were talking about the concern about political and social instability. How can you do such deregulation without really upsetting the public, not just in Egypt, but beyond Egypt, where you have more of state intervention and more of public sector dominance? Easy said, but mastering the practice of economic growth would require a great deal of understanding of how to deregulate properly. Easier said than done.
So the question, this is ball is up in the air. Anybody wants it? Deregulation, how to do it effectively. Francois.
Again, I don't think that there is any general answer to that, and I would really follow what Barry had just said. We know that many regulations are wrong. We know that deregulation is something which has to be done in some instances as economists. Now, we are not in the role of politicians who have to handle that. Because the main point is that, I mean, deregulation or regulations in many cases are essentially occasions to create rents. And some people are benefiting from those rents. And the whole community may be aware of the fact that this regulation is wrong, is inefficient, and that there would be a general gain in eliminating that regulation, but this is not done simply because the rent owners are sufficiently powerful politically to prevent that. So I think that in all these areas, everything is an issue of the context. In some contexts, it is possible for some reason to eliminate one source of rent and one source of inefficiency. And if this is the case, then of course the opportunity must be seized. But in some other cases, we'll have to wait and maybe a very long time before the opportunity comes to eliminate this. Now, on the other hand, we have these days a very good case of complete deregulation, which is the case of Argentina. But we have to realize that what Milei has been able to do in Argentina is due to a very specific political context at the time Milei was elected. It was a population which was desperate about the incompetence of politicians before Milei. And he came saying, okay, if you want me to change things, then you have to accept many things. And this worked. Or this seems to be working, at least. But again, I mean, not all countries will be in this kind of situation. And this is what is making policy making and economic advising so difficult? Is that we are always confronted with this kind of issue?
Yes, absolutely. I think we have a question over here, and then in the back.
Thank you.
We'll take those 3 questions and then have the answers. Go
I
ahead.
just wanted to follow up on that. So the Article 4 consultation has a number of specific recommendations in it, I gather. Maybe Yusuf's the only one that's looked at that, but I wonder if you were going to make a list of the 2 or 3 recommendations that are on the table, which ones do you think would be, most pro-growth?
This is for Egypt? Yeah. Okay.
Yes.
All right. Question here?
Yeah, so yesterday we touched upon monetary policy and exchange rate regimes for the region. So the starting point is that many countries in this region have a peg or somehow a de facto managed regime. Would the panelists agree that going forward in a world where trade, real shocks are going to be presumably more relevant, and in a region which struggle to diversify and upgrade in their trade and product base, a more flexible exchange rate regime would be a more suitable regime for the countries in the region?
Okay, thank you.
Hello. Well, actually, it's very, it's a coincidence that the question is actually like a follow-up to the same question, because what we've noticed, especially on growth in Egypt, that there is always growth spurts that do not continue, and it's always a currency crisis that comes and brings the growth down. So my question is how to avoid the next currency crisis.
Thank you for the 3 great questions. The first one on Article 4 recommendations. Which of those would you consider to be pro-growth? We need somebody who has seen the Article 4 in Egypt. The second one, for the region, whether flexible exchange rates are most appropriate given the prevailing conditions and what's likely to occur. And the third, how do we avoid stop and start growth? How can we have growth be sustained into the future? Who's going to go? Yes, you can start.
So I'll start with a question from Roberto on fixed and flexible. I think, I don't know much about the region, what I've seen from the presentations, but I'll talk from our own experience. I think inflation targeting with a flexible exchange rate served us well, and it's easier said than done. But at one point in time, you need to overcome the fear of floating, definitely, because your current account balance wouldn't be looking the same because of the whole crisis going around you. And then giving a commitment, which is a fixed exchange rate, would lead to the currency crisis that you were mentioning. So from our perspective and our own experience, I think we let the currency float during the worst times, during the wartime. And we succeeded by extremely open communication with the public. We had a day when national currency denominated deposits have been converted into US dollar deposits at very fast rate. But I gave 3 press conferences during 1 week trying to speak to the public openly and trying to explain them the role of fundamentals and the shock. And then that helped somehow because we intervened in the market with less than a third of what has previously been done. And since then, we haven't intervened in the market to do anything with the exchange rate. So exchange rate now for us works as a shock absorber, not a shock amplifier. So if you have a courage to overcome the fear, and then you have a support of your government in general, then you should do it. Because for me, the best way to do it is inflation targeting with a flexible exchange rate.
Yeah. And it's probably related to the question, the third question. Who wants to take on the third question? How do countries of the region, and I think you're talking about Egypt in particular, avoid stop and start growth where it succumbs to shocks?
growth means motion again in the entire economy. And if you're growing, there are variables that need to move. There are variables that need to adapt. If the growth stops after a while, it means you're choking up 1 or 2 or 3 variables from allowing them to adjust so as to accommodate the growth. So growth has to be an opportunity for changing all of those impediments that are choking up various variables in the system that will lead eventually, after a year or 2, to growth disappearing, pressure building up, the variable is blocked and refuses to, is not allowed to adjust, pressure builds up, crisis. So again, when you manage to succeed, and it's not easy to generate growth with an economy that has imbalances. It takes skill, and it takes public connections, and it takes talking to the public, talking to the world. But if you manage to generate growth with the imbalances that you have to use that as an opportunity to fixing whatever it is that is blocking the rest of the system from adjusting. If you do, the growth will continue. You will avoid the crisis and the growth will continue. The exchange rate is an obvious candidate. You block the exchange rate, it'll build pressure, it'll explode, it will adjust, growth will follow, and then you block it again, it'll build pressure, growth will stop, it'll explode, etc. So this is what, as an example, this is what creates the stop-go system, in that you have an opportunity of fixing the rest of the system that either is not growing or needs to change. You miss that opportunity, that system will block whatever is growing and build up pressure.
No, thank you, Youssef. I want to stay on this question for a little bit because it's so important and it really characterizes the experience of a lot of countries. Barry, earlier you spoke about being balanced across the cycle and using either fiscal or other policies in a counter-cyclical way. Is there a relationship between having buffers and having the space to engage counter-cyclically? Is that related in some way to being able to sustain growth over a long period of time? What does the theory say about this? Because I know you don't want to get into the practice and recommendations, so tell us about what the theory says.
No, actually I was Googling around yesterday, seeing what I could find that would be useful for this panel, and the first thing that came up with fiscal policy in Egypt was its pro-cyclical tendency, which is a problem, as people know, in a wide range of emerging markets and developing countries. So that's a more general, that's a specific instance of the more general phenomenon that, for political economy reasons, it's hard to lean against the boom when the boom is underway. So again, I am light on general knowledge about Egypt, but I could not be impressed by the morning bus rides and the amount of construction activity that seems to be going on. So I think I got to get out of Cairo to know how general the problem is, but it seems to be rather active. I thought the exchange rate question was a softball lobbed at me. I've long thought that emerging markets ought to move in the direction of greater exchange rate flexibility, and Egypt has been moving that way in the last couple of years, unifying multiple rates and moving toward a more freely yet managed float. And I think that kind of regime would serve the country well. It needs to be tried and it needs to be proven in order for it to be a stable managed float. The region has the additional issue that oil exporters peg to the US dollar. I've worked on exchange rates for a long time, and it's never been entirely clear to me why that is an optimal exchange rate regime for oil exporting countries, the mere fact that, oil prices still fluctuate, even though they're priced in dollars. But for those of you who think that because oil is priced in dollars, economies in the region ought to peg to the dollar, the fact that oil has been priced in dollars is apt to change.
Oh, wow, ominous. The question on Article 4 has not been answered yet. Does anybody? I mean, it's okay to say that the panel has been bold.
What was Article 4 question again?
Article 4, which of the recommendations in the IMF's Article 4 report on Egypt would be the most pro-growth? But if you don't have the recommendations on the top of your mind, you can't answer it.
No, I don't have the
All right, so
recommendation in mind.
we're going to pass. You have been successful in asking a question that the panel has passed on. Give him a round of applause. He has asked a... Yeah. I just want to make sure you have read the Article 4 consultation. You see, they were worried that you had read it, or else they'd have tried that as a... Okay, any other? We have time for one more round of questions. Minister of Planning, Economic Development and International Cooperation.
Well, thank you very much. I'm the only member of government here, but also I'm a student of Bretton Woods, did my internship at the IMF in '98, and then worked at the IMF, worked in the government with Dr. Youssef. I was at the central bank at the time, and now being in government for almost 8 years, consecutively. A few points to reflect on. First, reform is a continuous process, so the idea of motion is extremely important. But if I go back to the reform process in 2003, 2004, 2005, a very important aspect, which was reflected a little bit in the panel, but we should not forget it, is to have a strong banking system. A banking system which is credible, monetary policy which is transparent, well anchored with very clear targets. When I was recruited from the IMF to join Egypt here, it was to join the Central Bank of Egypt to implement inflation targeting. So at the time, in order for fiscal policy at the time to resonate and so forth, you had to have a foreign exchange market which was functioning, no backlogs, no black market. The reforms that took place in the banking sector allowed for the divestiture of one of the biggest banks at the time, Bank of Alexandria. So when we take a look at the investments that took place in 2004, they were based on a few big transactions which helped the balance of payments and did the turnaround. So in 2004-05, all the way till the revolution, it was really the government implementing an IMF program without an IMF program. So when you take a look at the elements of that reflected in an Article 4, any typical IMF Article 4, again, macroeconomic stability with the clear intersection between fiscal, monetary policy, being able to communicate, and then, again, trying to crowd in private investments. Let me go forward and say you do this because it was a very good question that we have times of growth, something happens, things drop, and then we move again and start reforms as if from scratch. So this is something that is repeated. But what is very important currently is there is a better understanding among regular people, among different strata of society, that you cannot fix the exchange rate, that the dividend you get from having a flexible exchange rate is important. And it has been reflected very much in the numbers. Since March 2024, when monetary policy and fiscal policy and Barry was mentioning public investments, cap on public investments, all of this led to today, when you look at the structure of our growth, you will see that the biggest contributors are the non-manufacturing industrial sectors. Exports are growing. So there has been in numbers and in reality and in employment, a dividend from moving towards the flexible exchange rate. All of us know about the vicious circle independent monetary policy, cannot work with a fixed exchange rate, cannot work with capital inflows. What we're trying to do now is to have a continuous circle, one where you have macro stability, structural reforms which are ongoing, and then economic development or growth, which then creates more levers and more inputs for macro stability. Dr. Mahmoud asked about Egypt's economic model after the IMF program, and I would like to comfort him that in June we will be publishing our narrative on advancing economic development in Egypt, reforms for growth, jobs, and resilience. And the key points, or the overarching element and framework for that growth model is one where we move from the non-tradable sector, from the construction, the infrastructure, which was needed at the time to build the ports, to be able to do the electricity, to bring in private sector investors, et cetera, et cetera. So you want to move the economy from reliance on non-tradables, which are not very productive. They might be big employers because of the type of not just the engineers and the high-level employment, but also the blue collars that work in such projects. So the growth model is one where you move from non-tradable, low productivity, to one which is into tradables, exports, and industrial production, where you need, again, a more complex, if you will, types of industry. We're moving in that direction, notwithstanding some of the headwinds that are happening from the global economy, but nonetheless, there are opportunities. Dr. Youssef very eloquently mentioned the rules-based multilateral system, which we are all still navigating and trying to figure out. But nonetheless, this creates a lot of employment, investment, and industrial opportunities for our case. But this piece, which will come out in June, has 4 key pillars. Macro fiscal resilience, which continues. It's a necessary condition if we're talking about growth continuing, if we're talking about FDI, if we're talking about anchoring expectations. Savings investment gap have to be addressed, and that's through fiscal policy and the monetary policy mix. And then the FDI strategy, which is much linked to the industrial strategy, and those are 2 pillars of this growth model. And then finally, the demographic dividend, which has to do with the skills and the employment. So this is going to come out, so we'll be at AUC maybe to launch it with everybody, but there is a growth model for Egypt. We are thinking and working through macroeconomic stability and lots of structural reforms, which are again categorized into maintaining and sustaining macroeconomic stability, so more fiscal reforms, better taxes, better administrative issues related to customs, trying to reduce the number of days that people need to take things out of customs, the non-tax barriers that face and the non-tax costs that face investors are quite huge. So when we say an average tax in Egypt for investment, we're trying to collect all of that, so it's only one number which again, when you're putting us in a table with competitors, you can say the effective tax rate is this much on investment. And then the green transition. For us, we are blessed with wind and sun, and there is a very important aspect of investments coming into this space. EU is a very strong partner for Egypt. CBAM is hitting us, but we'll be dealing with that. But nonetheless, there is a very good opportunity, and it is happening as we speak when it comes to the green investments that are taking place. And then finally, being responsible for international cooperation in this country, there are many partnerships with IFIs that are actually providing concessional finance to the private sector. So when we talk about financing for economic development, which is again, we have our champion here from the UN, and there's a conference coming up in June. The ability of this country to mobilize concessional finance, to de-risk the cost of finance to the private sector through partnerships is quite remarkable. In 5 years, $15 billion to the private sector, concessional finance. In 2024 alone, which was a year with very tough geopolitical situation in the region, $5 billion to the private sector. So again, these are all important messages. We're putting all of this together because, again, to be able to communicate it so that when you visit us all again next time, you'll have one document to read so you know everything that is happening here. But again, our growth model is one where we move from the non-tradable, unproductive sector to the tradable industry and exports. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Minister. There you have it, the way forward. Please give her a round of applause. And I think we're out of time, but I want to thank you for being an engaging audience and one that has tested the panel. And it remains for me to thank them. Please give them a round of applause. Youssef, Martin, Francois, and Barry. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen.
Ready?
Yeah, I'm ready, yeah.
Okay. Sorry about the mix-up. I was...
That's fine. You want me to what? Sit or
whatever makes you comfortable. Okay. Okay. So... So, ladies and gentlemen, we come to the last session. These are the concluding remarks by Nigel Clark, the Deputy Managing Director of the International Monetary Fund. Thank you so much for your patience and attention in the past 2 days. So, without further ado, Nigel, the floor is yours.
No, this is really standing between you and your lunch. Dangerous position. Distinguished participants and colleagues and friends, good afternoon again. As we conclude this inaugural Middle East and North Africa Research Conference, I want to take a moment to express a deep and sincere and heartfelt appreciation to all of you for making this such a rich and inspiring event, and to express similar gratitude to the American University of Cairo for co-organizing and hosting the event. Please express our gratitude to the American University of Cairo. University professors and directors of research at finance ministries and at central banks in over 20 countries of the Middle East and North Africa region would have participated in this conference, bringing together leading policymakers in addition to academics from North America,
from Europe and from Asia. Your insights have played a critical role in shaping rich and forward-looking discussions on the most urgent economic policy challenges facing the MENA region. For 8 decades, the IMF has assisted countries to secure economic stability and durable growth through its unique role as a trusted macroeconomic policy advisor and financial firefighter in times of crisis. Today, the world economy is at a pivotal juncture. Trade tensions have soared, fueling elevated uncertainties and introducing risks to growth and to financial stability. With the trust of our membership, the IMF will continue to stay at the forefront of the emerging challenges and help countries to strengthen economic resilience and build a more prosperous future. At this critical juncture, this conference focused on how to steer macroeconomic and structural policies in this kind of shifting global economic landscape. The first session examined the challenge of rebuilding fiscal buffers while reviving growth and addressing inequalities. Successive shocks have eroded fiscal margins in many countries. And the question is how best to rebuild these buffers. In the current economic environment, fiscal authorities face stark trade-offs with high debt and low growth and rising financing costs. But this is also an opportunity to strengthen revenue mobilization and to enhance tax and transfer systems. For instance, with broad-based consumption taxes complemented by targeted transfers, which could help countries return to fiscal health while protecting the most vulnerable and supporting growth. That is carefully calibrated policies that economize on resources. The importance of political ownership came to the fore. I'm glad that with my own country's experience, Jamaica's experience with fiscal rules and reforms based on consensus building was highlighted. While country circumstances differ, public trust and fair burden sharing are critical in fiscal adjustments to ensure that that social consensus can be sustained. Finally, embedding fiscal efforts in broader structural reforms can also smoothen the adjustment. In these kinds of reforms, ensuring that there's broad social consensus and cohesion is critical. The second session focused on monetary and financial policies. In the current environment, monetary policy will need to remain agile as countries face different challenges and different sets of trade-offs. In many economies, central banks began tightening too late following the pandemic shock, initially viewing inflation as transitory before shifting to aggressive rate hikes. Because the response was delayed, more aggression was required. This approach reduced inflation with relatively modest output losses, but at the cost of the experience of higher price levels and weaker real wage growth. Going forward, central banks must act early and flexibly. The Central Bank Governor of Armenia spoke about credibility being important to achieving stated monetary policy objectives. For emerging and developing economies, where this kind of credibility is still being built, consistent and transparent policies are especially vital. The Central Bank Governor again spoke to making the minutes of Monetary Policy Committee meetings available for the marketplace to scrutinize. This is critically important, again, for these objectives to be attained. At the same time, financial sector resilience is being tested. Interest rate volatility, tighter global financial conditions, and growing market fragilities are straining banks and increasing capital flow volatility. Policymakers must navigate these risks carefully to safeguard stability and ensure that financial systems continue to support growth and investment across the region. In a more interconnected and complex global landscape, stronger surveillance, better crisis preparedness, and where needed, new tools will be essential to maintaining market confidence. The resurgence of industrial policy was discussed in Anne Kruger's keynote speech and in the subsequent panel. Some industrial policies can enhance economic performance, while others can be very detrimental. It's clear that the government's role is not about direct intervention, nor is it about picking winners, but working closely with the private sector, mobilizing resources for shared goals, and investing in public goods that are aligned with a country's comparative advantage, offer the prospects of fostering long-term growth and innovation. Industrial policy, arguably, can facilitate structural transformation in economies, including in the context of today's rapidly evolving technological landscape. A dynamic and coordinated regional approach to economic transformation in the Middle East and the North African region may be helpful in enhancing regional value chains, technology, and skills. The fourth session focused on the twin transformations of the green transition and artificial intelligence, exploring how MENA economies can adapt to these mega trends. The MENA workforce is concentrated in relatively routine tasks, often in the informal sector, which are at a higher risk of automation. At the same time, large job reallocations are expected in the high-emission sectors as the transition to renewable energy accelerates. This raises the issue of whether proactive policies may be helpful, such as targeting labor market policies, upgrading educational systems, including in areas in science, technology, engineering, and mathematics, and reskilling programs, in addition to enhancing social protection and social safety nets as a support to formal employment. We need to discuss further the role of policy in facilitating the transition through innovation, through sustainability and inclusive growth to make sure that no one is left behind. Because the new economy is one that everyone needs to be a part of. In the concluding session, which was we just had, and I'm a little biased, it was rich in discussion on the way forward. And indeed, there was a question from the audience that absolutely stunned the panel and for which there was no response. That shows the audience capacity and interest in the topic at hand. At the IMF, we understand that the solutions must be tailored, as Professor Barry mentioned, to the specific needs of each country and region. And we do this through our three core functions: surveillance, financing, and capacity development, as well as through constant and deep engagements with various stakeholders. Indeed, the IMF remains committed to the Middle East, North Africa, and Pakistan region. We are scaling up our financial assistance. Since 2020, over $47 billion of financing has been approved for MENA countries. We are also engaging with the region through our capacity development initiatives, with 274 projects during the 2024 year and a growing regional footprint. We're also intensifying our efforts to support countries in the region working to rebuild after conflict. During the IMF World Bank spring meetings last month, we held a Syria roundtable to strengthen coordination among international financial institutions and donors in support of Syria's reconstruction. To ensure that our policy advice, our lending and capacity development are informed by sound and robust economic research, we have been engaging with academics and researchers. But this conference is a milestone demonstrating the IMF's commitment to deepening engagement with the research and academic community as we strive to ensure that the IMF's support is not only responsive to the needs of member countries, but also built on rigorous, tested analytics, and importantly, it's aligned with local realities. Through this kind of dialogue, this kind of multi-stakeholder dialogue, we aim to better understand how our expertise and resources can be directed towards the most pressing challenges of the region. And the lively and the thoughtful exchanges we had between policymakers, Minister Rania is here, between academics and practitioners and former practitioners, underscores the value of creating a space just like this. A space for open dialogue, a space for knowledge sharing, and the search for practical solutions grounded in both theory and experience. Moreover, the conference aimed to strengthen economic research capacities in ministries of finance and central banks in the region. We are absolutely proud and delighted to have launched this conference right here in Cairo, a historic center of learning and exchange for the region. And we are just as delighted to have it here at the American University of Cairo. We're deeply committed to making this the beginning of a lasting tradition. We look forward to hosting this event every single year. No pressure, Jihad. Rotating it across the major cities in the region and continuing to build a vibrant, engaged knowledge community that can help shape a stronger, more resilient future for the Middle East and North African region. Finally, I want to again express sincere gratitude and thanks to our partners, the American University of Cairo and the Egyptian authorities, who helped make this event possible and helped to make it a success. Your collaboration has been invaluable, and together we're helping to create an open forum that will continue to drive positive change throughout the region. Thank you once again for being part of this very important first step. Thank you and good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen.